Welcome everyone to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am your host, Laura May, and I promised you something special, and that is what I am delivering. So let me begin with a land acknowledgement. This land that we are on hosting this very special episode is on land that is held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We are on the Haldeman Tract, 6 miles on each side of Grand River, promised to the First Nations, but it was not granted, which is why we're doing the land acknowledgement. And I want to get us started, as Indigenous elders have taught me, by offering a reflection. And that reflection is as follows. Today we are about midway mark of a provincial election, and I am blessed enough to have alongside me candidates who are running for the seat in Kitchener Centre. And if there is one thing that I have learned from Indigenous communities, it's the importance of building relationships. Strong relationships based on trust, based on respect, based on love, and based on care. And so today, in honor of Black History Month in the midst of this election, I have candidates who are running for Kitchener Centre who are going to share their vision of love, care, and support for Black communities in this special episode called A Promise to Black Communities. And so I have with me today Brooklyn Wallace representing the ONDP. I have Colleen James from the Liberal Party and Aisling Clancy from the Green Party, who are going to begin this wonderful conversation by introducing themselves. So let me turn it over to Brooklyn.
Hi, my name's Brooklyn Wallace. I am a politician and activist in the area, and my involvement with the Black community is the same as every community in Kitchener. I have been a homelessness advocate, I've been a housing advocate, I've been a queer and LGBTQ advocate in the area for a long time, and as well as a massive advocate for environmental progress in the area. After an encampment of 6 people was bulldozed, using actual bulldozers, I decided to run for office a couple of years ago when I went for city council. Since then, I have been involved in everything. I've started a tenants union. I've been involved in the Climate Change and Environmental Committee at City of Kitchener, and all of these things have one thing in common, and it is that I am constantly looking out for the most disadvantaged people in this city. As a renter, as a queer person, as someone who doesn't make a lot of money and who has never made a lot of money, and someone who doesn't even have enough money for a car and is constantly using public transportation, I know that my voice isn't heard, and that helps me focus on the fact that even though my voice isn't heard and I am able to amplify a lot of people who are not heard in these conversations, I also know that I do not represent everything. I am a white woman, and that only brings so much diversity of thought and experience. And I have always been I've always tried to be as accepting and as just knowledgeable about that fact as I can.
Thank you so much, Brooklyn. And now over to you, Colleen.
Thank you, Laura May, and thank you for having this engaging conversation today specific to Black communities in Black History Month, along with an election. It is so important for us to, regardless of what is happening, to always make sure that Black History Month is celebrated throughout the month and throughout the year. I'm Colleen James, the Ontario Provincial Liberal candidate for Kitchener Centre. I am a member of the Black community. I have been part of all of the ways in which Black communities have been celebrated, but also where we've need to have systemic change within our communities. Prior to putting my name on the ballot, as a member of this community, advocating for, human rights of Black people and respect and dignity and trust. And growing up in this community, recognizing that, I was in spaces and, be it through education, healthcare, finance, not seeing people who looked like me, and recognizing the importance of having representation, because this is how we make decisions. This is how we make informed decisions about communities that are, impacted daily. So I am a proud Kitchener resident. My parents immigrated from St. Kitts and Antigua for, mobility, to ensure that their children had opportunities. I want to make sure that our children, our youth, our Black communities are always respected and represented. And one thing about what we navigate and what we have to navigate is when it comes to things like anti-Black racism, naming it, calling it, speaking it, because the reality is it does exist in our communities, and government is an opportunity and has the opportunity and has had the opportunity to ensure that we are intentional with how we make decisions, how we make policies. This is why I know that it is important for us to be in these spaces and to represent all community members, but knowing that there is specific intent, and I think we'll get into discussion about the ways in which, we can support Black communities. I am honored to be with a party that has representation and from various demographics, but also those who work in sectors that are from Black communities as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And now over to you, Ashlyn.
Thank you so much. I'm proud to have served this community as MPP, but I started growing up in the region, and my first job out of university, I spent a year in El Salvador, but realized, I acknowledged my white privilege, and it felt like it didn't fit for myself living in another country to have that position. But I got into settlement work when I returned to Canada, and I worked with the YMCA of the Three Rivers with newcomers in elementary schools, and I grew the newcomer youth program that still thrives today. And it's really those young people that started me on a significant path of understanding anti-Black racism and the impact that has on so many Black members of the community. I would go to this Cherry Street apartment, fill my car up with young people who had recently arrived from Sudan, and they would talk to me about what it was like to be Sudanese, to be Black, to be newcomers facing language barriers and parents who are struggling to pay the bills. And we would take that car ride, and they would share how their experience of racism was much like bullying, because they come from a collectivist community where when their brother is hurt, they hurt. And so they really changed the direction of my life. I went back to school and I studied intergenerational trauma. I studied my MSW at Laurier. I went on to work at the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, just realizing the impact of war, of racism and geopolitics, and what that changes in the fabric of Canada, and wanting Canada to be a welcoming place, and realizing the barriers that were there for people to make that so. As an MPP, I dedicated my time to showing up. We have so many wonderful not-for-profits in our community that do fantastic work, and it is upon me to be there with them in the background, cheering them on, showing solidarity, and making sure I'm always listening, being humbled by the fact that this is an ongoing journey to unpack my privilege and be sure that I'm standing up for my community. I need to speak up for my community. When Nicholas Nemhard was killed by police, I brought voice to that, knowing how shook the Black community was in Kitchener Centre. And so every day I will bring that voice with me to Queen's Park and ensure that I am in solidarity with the Black community. And I want to be sure that I'm lifting up members of the Black community. I had the girls and staff and grandmas and aunties come to Queen's Park. There was an entourage of 20 from African Women's Alliance. They got to make a petition and sign it, take a tour, and then they saw their words come to life in the legislature. And I wanted them to believe and see that this was their house and this is their place. And I will continue to tap people on the shoulders and lift them up to make sure that they see themselves as leaders. Too often, people start at the front lines, but they don't make it to the boardroom tables. They don't make it to CEO. They don't make it to the legislature. And I want to thank you. You lifted me up as a municipal candidate, and I remember that gift, and I used that gift, and it helped me come to where I am today as a woman in politics. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashlyn. And so for those that are watching, here is the master plan. At the University of Waterloo, I was blessed to work with a number of Black students who put together questions for this particular conversation, the promise to Black communities, for the candidates that are vying for a space in Kitchener Centre. For those that are wondering, anybody who had their name on the ballot for Kitchener Centre was in fact invited to attend. And I, just because of how I roll, will make sure that everybody has access to the questions, even if they weren't able to make it today. My hope is that at some point they will want to engage respectfully and from a place of love and care with Black communities. So I'll make sure that they have all of the questions. I need to give a shout out to my students, to Kalia, to Casey, Kiana, Avery, Alasia, and Olapo. Thank you so much for spending the time with me to review a document of a 36-page document of reports talking about anti-racism work that needed to happen in Ontario. And one of the big findings from their research was that there was one report that stood out, and that report is 33 years old. It was published in 1992. It is called The Report of the Advisor on Race Relations to the Premier of Ontario, Bob Rae. And the questions and the requests that were in there, the demands from community, the voices of community, have literally not changed very significantly since that report was first published. And so what we've decided to do is to put all of the questions in a variety of different categories, starting with that report, just to emphasize that here we are in 2025, Black History Month, and we are still fighting for the exact same things. So in just a moment after this break, and after you get a chance to have some nibbles, because I did bake you bread, as folks know that I do, we will dive in and talk about mental health, economic prosperity, community safety and justice reform, education, K-12 and post-secondary, and anti-racism and human rights in Ontario. So just hang on one moment. We are going to take half a breath and we're going to dive right in. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Well, folks, we're just going to dive right in. So as I was saying before the break, in this report on race relations that's 33 years old, Black communities were expressing the need for culturally responsive services. And so in June 2020, the Alliance for Healthier Communities put out a statement calling anti-Black racism a public health crisis, supported by Black healthcare leaders and later by unions and even politicians. Now, if elected, what steps would you take to address anti-Black racism within your party's healthcare platform? And we will start off with Colleen.
Yes, thank you. Well, you know, the travesty with this is that this report came out 33 years ago, and this is where we're at today. And when you look at our healthcare system and the state of our healthcare system and know that it's been underfunded, there are not enough people with family doctors, the fact of the matter remains that when it comes to Black mental health and healthcare, we are often ignored. We are often gaslit. We are made to feel as if what we are experiencing is not what we're supposed to be experiencing. And as a member of provincial parliament, and if elected, I will make sure that when we're dealing with healthcare, which we know is our #1 priority, we are nuanced in our approach. We ensure that there is specific intention with addressing Black mental health. We are in a time and place where our mental health is impacting all of the facets of how we survive within society. If we are not ensuring that we have culturally responsive healthcare, and with that I say as well, you know, having the medical staff, the trained medical staff, representative medical staff, because we know that there are a lot of internationally trained doctors, many of which are Black, that are unable to practice. We are ensuring that we will streamline this process because we know that international doctors and doctors as a whole are needed in this country and in this province in particular. One of the other things I think about in terms of the steps, so I sit as the co-chair of the Congress of Black Politicians, representing over 120 Black elected officials across this province. Our mandate in our platform is to make sure that we address the issues, in particular mental health and systemic racism within the communities and that in which we serve. So ensuring that there is policy that is developed that is encompassing of all of the different communities and Black communities. I think of it, as speaking with an individual and someone they know is a doctor and a father, and his daughter went into labor, and he could not perform the delivery because of cultural nuance, and
Thank
as a
you
result
so
ignored.
much.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Colleen. I'm so sorry. I have to throw it over to Ashlyn.
Thank you. I'm privileged to receive the throat. I think first off, we need to properly fund our healthcare system. We're the lowest fund province in all of Canada for hospitals and primary care. We know that when you starve a system, things that get cut are the things that are essential to making sure it operates properly. We would be remiss, we have to acknowledge the microaggressions that Black people experience in their healthcare system on an ongoing basis. We have to acknowledge the impact of anti-Black racism and how that affects people's health outcomes. We are facing a epidemic crisis in the rates of homelessness, poverty, and folks being able to pay their bills. This on top of that, and it disproportionately impacts racialized communities. We do need an oversight body with some teeth to make sure we can systematically dismantle the anti-Black racism and inequities that people experience in our healthcare system. It's inadequate that we are not taking a really forward, aggressive approach to make sure everyone has access, they feel seen, heard, and there's trust there. Trust has been broken, trust has been lost, and trust needs to be restored from all people. We also need to fund a lot of our mental health and physical health services. As a social worker, I see how it's inappropriate. People don't need mental health supports from me often as a white woman working in our education system. I was so happy to be there in the beginning days of Kind Minds. I brought Kind Minds to our team to make sure that we knew and supported this wonderful service in our community, this not-for-profit that needs more funding to reach more young people and people of all generations. I hope you look them up, they're amazing. And if you go to places like Toronto, Taibu is a community health center with an Afrocentric lens. Let's expand these family health teams to ensure people can access their healthcare with a cultural lens in mind. And let's look at the intersections of oppression, not just looking at someone as Black, but as a woman, as a queer person, someone living in poverty, and somebody with a disability. It's important we see the whole person and treat them so.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. And now we'll throw it over to you, Brooklyn.
Well, we all know that the pandemic hit certain communities more than others, and there's a reason for that. And the NDP and I am very aware of the anti-Black racism epidemic that's going on, and we would declare it a public health crisis as soon as entering office, because that's what Black experts are telling us to do. We will be listening to the people who are much more experienced in this area than we would. And we know that the people who are missing family doctors, the people who are most experiencing the cost of privatization and the closing of ERs and the problems with family doctors and the waiting times and all of that, we know that that is disadvantaged communities more than anything. And so just by hiring doctors, just by making sure that people coming in from other countries with different types of credentials, that making sure that we are using that expertise properly and reworking our system to be able to accept them into as doctors, as the doctors that they fully are, that will obviously help everyone, but it's going to help the people who are most disadvantaged much more. And that's what we need to be doing is seeking. My headphone came out. We need to be seeking these equitable solutions.
Thank you so much, Brooklyn, and we will be right back after this break. Hello and welcome back. So folks, we're going to move into economic prosperity. Again, in this report that is 33 years old, there were urges from community to the government to enforce employment equity policies. However, today, the Ontario Employment Equity Act is no longer. It was repealed actually in 1995. And so we know that Black business owners in Kitchener-Waterloo face difficulties in accessing funding and resources. What specific policies will you introduce to support Black entrepreneurship in this region? And I'm going to start with you, Ashlyn.
Thank you. I am the widow of a serial entrepreneur. So we know that when we lift up Black entrepreneurs, we lift up the family. And we know how much passion and excitement and dedication goes along with starting your own business. It's like having another child. And I experience that when I see that spark when I attend and meet with the founders at Liftoff. I'm so amazed at all of the excitement and passion that they bring to things every day. So we do have a lot of policies that apply to small, medium business widely, cutting a lot of red tape, reducing the tax burden for entrepreneurs. We also, as a Green Party of Ontario, need to keep funding programs like Liftoff that lift up our Black entrepreneurs and help them succeed. We know colleges and universities as well need this seed funding, but we don't want to just innovate in this region. We want to make sure that we can commercialize those experiences, those ideas, and translate the innovation into big sales. Too many businesses can only sell in the States or abroad. They are struggling to sell within our communities. And that's why I've been happy to use my position when I was MPP to lift up these founders. You know, I met with a founder who wants to start a Black Afrocentric retirement home, for example. What an amazing idea. And how would that matter to her? She tended to our seniors. She sees how they don't get their hair done properly and the staff don't cater to the unique cultural needs and dishes that they like to see. So we're happy to invest in that program of having more options in retirement homes and invest in those small businesses so they can get off the ground. I've also brought together founders with different partners in the community to take more ideas to solving the housing crisis. As a business grad, I think we need to make sure we train people in equity. It's inadequate. It needs to be in all of our programs, and we need investment opportunities so that all startups can have the seed funding they need to thrive.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. And now we'll throw it over to Brooklyn.
The Ontario NDP is committed to a whole of government approach to addressing systemic anti-Black racism. We know that these problems are systemic, that they have been around for a long time, and we need to be actively hunting them out. So by fully funding the Ontario Anti-Racism Directorate and having it have a full secretariat status, as well as having a minister responsible for anti-racism, we will be looking at these problems from every possible angle across the entire province. Kitchener-Waterloo obviously is a place that's very important to me, and I've been an advocate for upstream funding, for investing in ending the root causes of a lot of these problems, a lot of these disparities, and that will never stop. I believe that there is excellence in this community, and that's going to be coming from every possible source. So our community, our strategy for these things is focusing on undoing the harms that have been done, while also lifting up the people who haven't been given the chance to be lifted up for generations.
Thank you, Brooklyn. And over to you, Colleen.
Thank you. I think this is a very important, and it hits home personally, because when I started my business over 10 years ago, there was no access to loans. There was no support for Black businesses. In fact, the ability to even get the support needed was null. It is an absolute honor for me in the role that I do, and to be able to be a mentor with the businesses going through Liftoff and uplifting them, but also mentoring them. One of the things that we need to do is recognize that Black businesses are part of our economy and help us thrive. And in terms of funding sources, ensuring, right now the province doesn't give anything to Liftoff right now and to many organizations in terms of supporting Black businesses. I am someone who wants to ensure that through good policy, that we have social procurement policies that are specific to Black, Indigenous, racialized organizations, because the barriers, even when it comes to thinking about procurement and the barriers that exist for small businesses, especially Black businesses, in a province where we have a growing community of entrepreneurs, the policies that the province, that communities need to do is, we're way far behind. And as a small business owner and somebody who knows that oftentimes our ideas are not necessarily supported, but then they're taken and utilized by white businesses, ensuring that there is support and sustainability for longevity. So it's not just the funding, it is actually ensuring that there is sustainable measures to ensure that these businesses are prolonged for a very long period of time. And let's not forget, we've been entrepreneurs for many, many, many years. This is nothing new. We're just behind in the support and the funding that's needed.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And folks, we will be right back after this break. Welcome back, everyone. So we are switching gears again. We're moving into community safety and justice reform. So thinking again, 33 years ago, the disproportionate surveillance, harassment, and use of force against Black communities by law enforcement was highlighted in this report. On February 21st, 2024, the Waterloo Region Police Services released their use of force statistical report. Now, this annual reporting is a legal requirement for all police services across the province. Using 2021 census data, the WRPS found that, and I'm quoting, Black people, and the ratio is 3.72, and Middle Eastern folks, the ratio is 2.75, were overrepresented. Now, this has been an annual trend in their reporting, and it's clear that oversight alone is insufficient to stop this trend. What will your party do to ensure Black people across Waterloo Region are safe in their communities? And we're going to start with Brooklyn.
Seeing this data makes me hurt. If I'm being completely honest, I don't have incredible one-stop solutions to these problems, but I can commit to working towards fixing it in every possible direction. This is terrible. This is the systemic racism problem that we see that has existed in North America for a very long time. And as a single white woman, I might not have all of the solutions, but I do know that we care, that the Ontario NDP cares, but more importantly, that I care. I will not let things slide. We have, as I mentioned before, we have the Anti-Racism Directorate. We will be funding that. We will be reinstituting the ARD's working groups on anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, every possible piece of racism that is going around this province. And we're going to listen. I will make sure that people are hearing these voices. Personally, I will guarantee that I can't guarantee that we can solve this problem in a term, but again, can guarantee that I will not let this slide.
Thank you so much, Brooklyn. Now over to you, Colleen.
Thank you. Community safety justice reform for Black communities is something that has been on the table and increasing in terms of the disproportionate number of Black, and in this case, the data you gave us, the Middle Eastern population. But I will tell you, growing up in this community, it has personally impacted me, the friends that I've grown up with, to see that there's been an overuse of force, from being frisked, strip searched, all of that. I think when it comes to justice reform, and we have to look at this from a systemic approach as well, this involves what are the critical resources that can be used instead of policing. And this is when we look to, again, our healthcare system and ensuring that there are health supports there. And in terms of a justice reform, well, we know that the justice system is harsher on Black individuals and Black bodies in particular. Our police, I think this comes back to as well the notion of trust and building trusted relationships. I will say I have seen intent from our police services to build more trust, but we need to ensure that it's not just spoken about, that it's actually being applied to. And that means what are the services and what supports are being provided to community groups and also to those officers. I often think about things like what type of culturally responsive training is being enacted, what type of policies are specific, and also, again, this comes down to as well representation. I would love to see that within our police and our justice system, that there is specific intent to have culturally responsive positions that deal with and work with and build trust within various communities, Black communities, adding in that intersection of those persons with disabilities and in the many different identities, especially looking at the type of immigration and the increased immigration we have in this province.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And now over to you, Ashlyn.
Thank you so much. I go to work every day and I hear Doug Ford say things like, I'm going to fine people in tents $10,000. I don't think anyone in a tent has $10,000. And so they're looking at jail. We know that the answer is not jail to a lot of the systemic gaps and failures of this government. We have 81,000 people who are homeless in this province. We have 1,400 encampments. How does that affect marginalized and vulnerable communities? We need to do better, and we need to ensure that we have those supports in place. Too often, EMS services, police, ambulance, fire are going to situations that they are not trained for and they're not prepared for. It's time that we invest in things and treat things in the way they're supposed to be treated. We need to invest in mental health responses when people are having a mental health crisis from a mental health professional. And we need to divert people away from jail cells and emergency rooms to places like Threshold, where they're met in a warm, safe environment where they can relax and they can feel heard and seen and they can have their needs met in a welcoming and stigma-free environment. But we know we have to do more than that. As you say in the question, oversight alone is insufficient. I don't believe that our system of holding police accountable for police brutality is effective. We need to reform our bail system. We need to reform our justice system that disproportionately has increased levels of Black, Indigenous, and racialized people. And we need to stop and destroy all data that relates to carding. We know that the data is clear and it's been there for 30 years. It's time that this government not just talk about being allies with the Black community, but actually put some teeth and some dollars into it. Too often they have equity, phrases, and ideologies, but there is no dollars attached to that, and there is no teeth to make sure that these words translate into action. That's what I've seen as MPP. That's what I'll keep fighting for the people of Kitchener Centre.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to move ourselves into education. And 33 years ago, in that very same report, Ontario's Eurocentric curriculum was criticized, and recommendations to integrate Black histories into mainstream education were made even then. Now, locally, the Black Brilliance program in Waterloo Region District School Board has grown exponentially over the years, which signals that Black youth flourish and thrive in spaces that are dedicated to their needs. If elected, what tangible steps will you take to ensure that Black-focused programming is adequately supported in the region? And we are going to start with Colleen.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Laura May. The Black Brilliance program, kudos to everyone involved in that program, because as someone who grew up in this school system, there was nothing that existed like that to support us as Black students. And we literally felt like we were in the trenches alone. So thank you to Black Brilliance and to all of the people involved in that. What I plan to do and what I will make sure is that programs like this, they don't go anywhere, because we are under attack right now. There are people and places and systems that do not want these programs to continue, and they are absolutely vital to students, their success, and their future. I ask adults all the time, how many of them learned about Black history, and not just from a deficit perspective of the Underground Railroad, but actually the people that were contributing. I would say 99% of the time, nobody raises their hands or they learn about Harriet Tubman. What about the Black presence that existed here, the importance of that, all of which has contributed to how these communities have been thriving, part of communities that have complemented. It is so essential, and especially when it comes to education and curriculum, that we ensure that there is Black curriculum and making sure that that promise that's been made happens. And the other thing to think about too is then who's creating the curriculum. I want to make sure that we have the specialists, we have the experts, we have the historians, and the people who are in this province and their descendants are part of this. Rosemary Sadler wrote an excellent book about Black history. That should be in every single school. There is no excuse to not have our presence in this school, because we are here, we've been here, we're not going anywhere, and the fact of the matter remains that we are part of these communities, all of the communities across this province. So I will ensure that that happens, that gets done, and you're going to have a voice and presence that makes sure it does.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Over to you, Ashlyn.
Thank you. I worked in the education system for 11 years, and I saw on an ongoing basis the gaps that exist. They've only increased since this Ford government took office. We now see that the school boards in this region are short $29 million. When the Ford government put in equity demands for data collection and training, he didn't fund it. So I think it's time that we demand that this government shore up funding. So let's not starve the system. Make sure that we have adequate supports in schools, and make sure that that mental health support and those supports for students who are left behind, 73,000 students with autism on an autism wait list that go to school every day. But let's make sure that those staff are prepared to support each student with their reality and use an anti-oppressive lens through our hiring practices, through our capacity building. And that includes this curriculum. And we need to fund the curriculum. We need to give the teachers time and not just slap something on their desks and expect them to do a good job with that training. We need to make sure the curriculum comes from the people who are experts, and then give the funding and time required to make sure that that curriculum is delivered well. Too often we talk about violence in schools. The ETFO and education sector talk about this. We have, since COVID, I've seen a massive shift in the burnout of education workers, a massive shift in the needs of families and young people. And too often it's our most vulnerable students, it's Black students, racialized students that are forgotten, left behind, and all those supports that we want in our colleges and universities, the supports we want in our K-12 schools that are cut because we can't even pay for buses. We don't fund buses for how much buses cost. Where does that money come from? It comes from student supports, and enough is enough. It's time that we ensure that every student has the support they need, and that we take equity from the top level all the way down to the frontline staff workers.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. And now over to Brooklyn.
I love the Black Brilliance program at the WRDSB. I am such a massive fan of the work that our school board is doing in a lot of different ways. So I will personally be fighting for that. I show up to regional council, I show up to school board meetings, I show up to city council meetings, and that's not going to stop just because I'm MPP. I will continue fighting for these upstream solutions because they are, not only are they more cost effective, not only do they work better than downstream punishments, but they form communities. And that is what my work at Spectrum is all about, is forming a stronger queer community in Waterloo Region and having strong newcomer communities, as well as all of these different pieces of the city. I love Kitchener-Waterloo, and I love seeing these upstream funding efforts exist and thrive. And the NDP, the Ontario NDP, knows that upstream is the way to go. So we have commitments, and we will follow through on those commitments on upstream funding, on making sure that things like this program are not just cut, but are rewarded for their excellence and for their success.
Thank you, Brooklyn. So we are going to wrap it up with a final question on anti-racism work. Again, 33 years ago, Black community members called for long-term policies that can address systemic racism. However, despite this, they were seeing a rise of hate crimes, and that trend continues today. Of the 369 hate crimes or hate incidents reported by the WRPS in 2023, 190 involved race or ethnicity. And of these, 43% were targeting Black people in our communities. If elected, what would be some concrete actions that you would take to protect Black communities? And we'll start with you, Ashlyn.
Thank you, Laura May. This is something that's really close to my heart because when I watch what's happening in our school system, I see how much the online world has done us no favors. When Donald Trump was president the first time, we saw multiple hundreds of % increase in hate because there are a lot of people out there that want to act out violence, and now they felt legitimate to do so. We see excessive profiteering over these toxic social media rabbit holes, and we see that those incidents don't just happen. There's a paper trail, a breadcrumb trail that we need to start following to the very beginning and hold those bad actors accountable for the garbage they're putting online and the garbage that is turning up and offending and harming racialized communities in Waterloo Region. I do regard the work of Geraldine Stafford in the WRPS. When I found out that we are the highest rated hate crime reported in the country, I went to the WRPS. I went to Conestoga because we know there's a toxic rhetoric around international students. We need to get to the root and we need to address it.
Thank you so much, Ashlyn. And now we'll throw it over to Brooklyn.
This question hits a very personal part of my life, not only because I have friends who have been accosted on the street in racist assaults, but I also know that a lot of the remaining 57% of hate crimes in the area are targeted at my community. So I know what it is like to have this specter of hate crawling upon us. And that's why we are committed to this anti-racism directorate. That's why we're going to be having these working groups, as well as investing in the root causes of violence, the communities and jobs and affordable housing that leads to these problems.
And thank you, Brooklyn. Over to you, Colleen.
One of the things that I know I will make sure of is that anti-racism directorate that the province is no longer has and supports will be supported and invested in. We also need to ensure that when we're looking at anti-racism and anti-racism policies, that we ensure we have the people in the places that can actually do the work. I do believe it's an everybody responsibility, but in this community, we should never be at the levels we are at. As someone who has grown up here, what I am seeing now, I am terrified for the future of our children. The future of our children, and if we do not have commitments by this province and that anti-racism directorate, which is so important, have that funded, I don't know, I'm worried about the trajectory of this community. Racism is pervasive in every single system in the fabric of our society. We need to ensure that it is all hands on deck. We need to make sure we're naming it, we're placing it. We also need to recognize that anti-Black racism is the #1 form of racism in this community. And that is something we need to be concerned about.
Thank you so much to all of you. So again, with me today, we had Ashlyn Clancy from the Green Party, we had Colleen James from the Liberal Party, and Brooklyn Wallace from the ONDP. Thank you all for tuning in for this very special episode, A Promise to Black Communities. And I can't wait to see what happens next.